Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we're going to take a look at a Hungarian AK. Specifically, this is an AK-63F. It is basically the last pattern of Kalashnikov manufactured by FEG in Hungary, although its development dates back several decades. And I think there are some interesting stories to it. Now, before we go any farther, let me remind you that we are right now running a Kickstarter campaign for Headstamp Publishing's newest book, which is specifically about Hungarian Kalashnikovs. It is entitled Rifles on the Danube, written by one Laszlo Betz, who is a fantastic wealth of information about all things Hungarian small arms. And the book has a tremendous amount of awesome, both grand scale context of what was going on with Hungary, why it was producing rifles, where it was exporting rifles, as well as using them internally for its own defense and police use. And also a book that goes all the way down to the very granular detail, identifying specific serial number prefixes, what they indicate, total production quantities and dates for not just rifles, but accessories like even bayonets and magazine pouches. It's a fantastic book. You should definitely check it out over on Kickstarter. I have a link in the description text below. But as for our AK-63F here, this story begins in 1978. And at that time, the Hungarian military had adopted as its standard infantry rifle the AMD-65. But these been in service for a decade now. A lot of them were starting to get worn out, and there was an interest in finding, like, refurbishing some guns and getting some stuff, some new guns back into Army hands. So the initial idea is someone remembered that, like, we have the old AK-63s, which was essentially this configuration of rifle manufactured before the AMD-65, the AMD-65, by the way, being substantially different in character. And that AKM-63 was rejected for general service in favor of the little shorty guy because the little shorty guy was cheaper. So they had still had some of these older rifles in stock, and they decided, we'll just refurbish those. We'll take, they had these metal handguards and plastic pistol grips on them. We'll take those off, we'll replace them with modern wood furniture, refurbish the guns. Like, it'll be fairly inexpensive. We get good rifles out of it. Seems like a good idea. They tested these in late 1979. Not surprisingly, the testing went really well because they're pretty well proven guns. There's not a whole lot to go wrong there. And production began in 1980. Now, the FEG factory was still making a lot of AMD-65s at the time. Remember, Hungary did a lot of small arms exporting, so it's not just guns for their own internal military that they're worried about. They're also selling a lot of stuff. So production of these guys, well, initially refurbishment of AKM-63s, goes fairly slowly. They do, before too long, actually run out of original rifles to refurbish, and they start just manufacturing the pattern from scratch with a few changes to it that we'll take a look at in just a moment. But by the time the end of 1982 rolls around, they've only made about 50,000 of them. It's about 35,000 for domestic Hungarian use and about a little under 15,000 for export. And people start complaining about them because they've gone from a very short rifle to, well, a full-length Kalashnikov. It's got the full-length 16-inch barrel, now also with a slant break. It's got a fixed buttstock. People are used to a very compact gun, and they start thinking, well, you know, isn't there some way we can make this shorter? The FEG factory looks at this and figures, oh, you know what? We can just put on a Soviet underfolding stock. Apparently, having forgotten basically all of what they had learned about Soviet underfolding stocks 20 years earlier when they developed the AMD-65 without one. But apparently kind of lost track of some of this former knowledge. They go ahead and set up production for underfolding stocks, only to discover that, yes, in fact, they are more expensive to manufacture than a simpler AMD side folder. They're more fragile. They're more difficult to build. There's a lot more parts in them. In particular, the stock is mounted at 2 points, one on each side of the receiver. And so where with the AMD-65, you've only got one junction to get right, on underfolder, you've got two, and if either one of them is messed up, the stock doesn't work so well. So there were some teething problems, there were some quality control issues that they had to get worked out. But eventually they start building these, and this is designated the AK-63D. It's D for folding stock in Hungarian. And that will take over and become most of the production until 2002, when these guys go back into production one more time. And we'll talk about exactly why in a minute, but first, let me show you the specific details and what separates the AK-63F here from any other Soviet bloc AKM. Now, the original AKM-63 rifles that were updated, that were reconditioned into this configuration with the wooden hardware, those are going to have all the features of original AKM-63s. And by the way, I apologize for the terminology here being rather confusing. There are a lot of letters and designations that are reused in Hungarian AK nomenclature. But if we're taking a look at this one, which we are, this is one of the new production AK-63Fs, and so it will have a couple of specific changes that were made to either simplify or economize or improve production. Starting at the front here, we have a slant muzzle brake. The original AKM-63s just had a muzzle protector. They didn't initially see the slant brake as being particularly useful or worth putting on there. We also have, some of these are pretty minor changes here, but bear with me. The weight reduction hole in the front sight block on the new production F models here is squared off. On the original early guns from the early 60s, or from the mid 60s, that's more round. Hungary's original AKMs did not have vented gas tubes. They just had a vented gas block like the original AK. Well, when they started producing these, they went ahead and added vent holes here, but they continued to use a vented gas block. Usually you get one or the other of these. These late pattern Hungarian guns have both. There is, by the way, as far as I can tell, absolutely no practical impact to that. You kind of want to have at least one of those features. Having two is fine and doesn't really change anything. The function here is just to give gas a place to vent. So you can actually see the gas piston moving inside there. As soon as the gas piston gets back to here, it's moving fast enough to fully cycle the gun, and you want a way to release the gas pressure, and that's what these holes are for. Lastly, with this new production, a number of parts that had previously been forged and then finished machined were changed to precision castings instead. Notably, not the critically important parts like the front trunnion and the bolt, but things like the front sight and rear sight blocks were changed to a cast method of production because that was more economical. And the Hungarian pattern handguards are just smooth-sided, no extra features of any sort there. The rear sight is graduated out to 1,000 meters, back up to that standard instead of, remember, the 800 that they reduced it to on the AMD-65. They will all have the Hungarian style grips. Hungary used this shape of grip in plastic originally and then kept its shape when they went to wood. We do have an Arabic rack mark on here. I'll talk about that in just a minute. The trunnion marks on Hungarian AKs are a bit less interesting than some other producers, but what we get is either a 1 or 2 letter prefix and then either a 4 or 5 digit serial number. Those prefixes will tell you, well, a lot of them are identified. In fact, in our book, Rifles on the Danube, we identify what virtually all of the pre-2000 suffixes mean. S is, well, the guns that were made starting in 2002 for Middle Eastern export use suffixes starting at C and running to X as far as we can tell. And this S, 57,000, is definitely in that batch. Hungary made a lot of 20-round magazines for the AMD-65s. Those, of course, will work in these guns, but the AK-63F here was designed was intended for and designed with a standard 30-round magazine, which is totally interchangeable with all other standard AK magazines. Disassembly is also the same. I will point out we have matching numbers on this gun, which is pretty cool. Disassembly is just like every other standard AK. There's really nothing unusual going on here. So it appears in the early 1980s, when they were originally manufacturing these guys, they built actually a lot of spare parts. Some of the parts, at least, were in significant excess to the total number of rifles put together, which makes sense. If the production was slow, some stuff would be way overstocked and there'd be some choke points of what was limiting complete rifle production. At any rate, starting in 2002, production of the AK-63F here resumed, starting at least with leftover parts. It's not clear to me if they used them up and then just started making more stuff, or if they were using leftover parts for the entirety of this production. But production would run for like 14 years because these were being produced and exported from 2002 to 2016 into primarily the Middle East. And in fact, there was a report from Conflict Armament Research that, came out in 2018, I think, that found Hungarian rifles actually is the fourth most common rifle in ISIS hands in Syria and Iraq. Now, Hungary had not been supplying rifles directly to ISIS, of course, but they had been supplying them to nominally friendly countries in the Middle East, things like the Iraqi army, whose guns didn't stay with the Iraqi army all that often. So these have actually found their way into a bunch of places in the Middle East these days, and that's where this one actually came from. So this was a parts kit. It was an AK-63F that was cut into a parts kit, re-imported into the US, and I purchased this from Atlantic Firearms in this configuration. So everything about it, except the receiver, the barrel, and the fire control parts, is original Hungarian AK-63F of actually pretty recent production, because this is one of those 2002 to 2016 era guns manufactured for export to the Middle East. So that's why it has that Arabic rack number still on the buttstock. And frankly, I think it's a really cool example of the type. This is a relevant recent production batch of these guns. The exact numbers, the exact serial number, serial prefixes are still considered secret by the Hungarian government. That Conflict Armament Research report has a bunch of serial numbers of captured documented examples, and they include 2 S prefix guns that bracket this one in serial number. So this, we pretty much 100% know that this came out of Iraq, Syria, Jordan, somewhere in the Middle East. Anyway, if you're interested in Hungarian Kalashnikovs, and who wouldn't be, especially if you're still here at the end of the video, you should definitely check out our ongoing Kickstarter for Rifles on the Danube. It has about a week left to go right now. We have a bunch of cool extras for the book. We have a couple different patterns, different styles of the book for you to choose from. We have cool stretch goals, all sorts of fun stuff to check out. So take a look at the Kickstarter campaign. There's a link in the description text below, and it truly is the best book that is going to be out there, and possibly ever will be out there, on Hungarian AKs. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.